Joining me now from the foyer of the House, Mark Adler, Ontario Conservative MP and member of the Finance Committee, and Peggy Nash, NDP finance critic, and in Halifax, Liberal finance critic Scott Bryson. Well, Peggy Nash, the NDP has launched its Real Things for Real People alternative budget campaign today. Let's start with you. It includes more spending on infrastructure and pension programs and healthcare for vets and jobs for youth. You guys are spending money like it's going out of style. How would the NDP pay for all of these investments? Conservatives say $56 billion. What do you say? Are they wrong?
Well, they're pulling a number out of thin air. But what we would do is just switch the priorities. Budgets are about choices. So, you know, fighter jets that would cost $40 billion, maybe we would reallocate some of that money into the priorities that people need on a daily basis, like getting rid of gridlock and congestion in our major cities, replacing crumbling roads and bridges across this country. For goodness sakes, we've got a deficit of infrastructure, and not investing in infrastructure costs us, according to the boards of trade and chambers of commerce, costs us about $10 billion a year.
Okay,
so it's not a question of if we can, it's a question of what we do.
With respect, you're quite ready to put a figure on that, but if you're not prepared to put a figure on your alternative budget, why should we take you seriously?
Well, because, Terry, it's not an alternative budget. But let me just say this. You know, what we're calling for is a continuation of the gas tax, for example, and we would add another penny to the gas tax transfer to municipalities. That would cost, and we cost it out every time we have a platform in an election campaign, that would be about $400 million. But you know, these are infrastructure investments that, I mean, what we're calling for is that these will go out over 15 to 20 years. These aren't expenses that you would totally pay for tomorrow. These are long-term investments. In fact, what we're saying is that for the government to just make a short-term investment doesn't give any kind of assurance or planning ability to the province and municipalities. The federal government has to work with them, lay out a long-term plan. All three governments have to put into this, and Canada needs to show our commitment over the long term.
All right, let's talk about long-term plans. Mr. Adler, how about you? We know, there's a long list of international organizations that lauded the Canadian economy, but the problem is the government's still facing much slower economic growth than it forecast last year. Last year, we were being told 2.7% was predicted in last year's budget, and now it's 1.7%. Isn't there still some room in these circumstances for some sort of stimulus to spur growth while the global economic outlook is still on shaky ground?
Well, let's not forget, Terry, that through the Economic Action Plan to get us through the recession, the government spent over $50 billion in unprecedented cooperation with the provincial and municipal governments, which have created thousands of new jobs, all shovel-ready. Now, I just last week was in my own, just north of my own riding of York Centre in the city of Vaughan, and we initiated the next phase of the Spadina subway, which represents a $679 million investment and 10,000 new jobs to go into the city of Toronto and the city of Vaughan. And Minister Ambrose just last Friday announced in Edmonton a $250 million investment in a light rail transit system. So we are getting the job done. And as a distinction, just let me point out, and this is a very important distinction for the viewers to keep in mind, is that while we are creating jobs on the ground here in Canada and have the best job creation record of any G8 country in the world, Thomas Mulcair, the leader of the NDP, is down in Washington and down in New York, trashing Canada, calling the oil sands a disease, saying that he is going to be raising taxes if and when he assumes government to the tune of $34 billion. That's on top of the $20 billion in their platform for the carbon tax. And who's going to pay for that? Those are average Canadians. So if anybody is standing up for average Canadians, it is Stephen Harper, Jim Flaherty, and the Conservative government.
Just for the record, can you let us know whether you plan to say anything about the question asked of you, which was about the rate of growth being cut almost in half?
You know what, Terry, as I had indicated, we are still the #1 growing economy in the G8. The last quarter of last year, we grew 0.6%. Our job creation in the month of February was 50,000 new jobs. An additional 60,000 people put themselves into the workforce. The president of Cisco Systems, John Chambers, has said Canada is the best place to be doing business. Governor Barnstad of Iowa said he is reluctant to invite companies to invest in Iowa because they're so close to the Canadian border. As soon as they hear about Canada, they're out of Iowa and up to Canada. So we are a model of economic performance in the world. And we have our Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to thank for that as we are on track to balance our budget in 2015.
All right, let's see what Scott Bryson has to say about that. I'm particularly interested in anything you want to say. You know, of course, Scott, that the government is forecasting a lot of action in the budget about skills training, and I'd be interested in knowing your comments on that as well.
Well, first of all, we have a youth unemployment crisis in Canada. Last summer, we had the worst student employment numbers since Stats Canada started tracking those back in the 1970s. One quarter, over 25% of Canadians between the ages of 25 and 29 are still living at home with their parents. And the government has done next to nothing to address this. In fact, Terry, they closed student employment offices. They refused to bring in a hiring credit for employers who create jobs for young people, and they still haven't addressed the whole issue around training and providing the opportunity for them to learn the skills.
If they do address those problems, you'll support them, of course.
Hope springs eternal, but the reality is what the Conservatives are saying about balancing the budget in 2015 is highly unrealistic, and it's a political objective. It's not an economically credible one. And the reality is what we have to do right now is address this youth employment issue. Otherwise, we could lose a generation of young Canadians and their potential. It is absolutely essential, and the Conservatives are trial ballooning that they intend, in fact, to cut the $2 billion a year, over $2 billion, that is being transferred to provinces now for training, and leave a gaping hole while they build a national program. And I don't think that's cooperative federalism. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for young people who need opportunities and training and skills today.
All right, why don't we confront Mark Adler with that trial balloon? Mr. Adler, has the government consulted with the provinces on changes to EI skills training programs? You know they have a lot to do with this.
Terry, let me tell you that, first of all, I'm not going to speculate in what's in the budget, but I am going to tell you the facts, and the facts are quite clear. This government has consulted more with the provinces and more with business and labor and stakeholders than any other government in Canadian history. Let me tell you, our finance minister has said that we will not be balancing the budgets, unlike the Liberals did in the 90s, on the backs of seniors, in terms of cutbacks to the provinces and social programs, or on the backs of our youth in terms of education. In fact, quite the contrary, we have made record investments in funding for the provinces. We have guaranteed a 6% increase in funding both to the provinces and to social programs, and to up until 2015, when we will increase them as a basis of minimum 4% plus nominal GDP. We are committed to doing this, unlike the previous Liberal government, which slashed social programs.
Sorry, but we're running short of time. We've got to give a quick last word to Peggy Nash. Are they going in the right direction?
No, they're not. You know, austerity measures has been shown in Europe and in other parts of the world. Japan's another good example. Austerity measures just lead to economic stagnation. That's not what this country needs. This country needs to get back on track. It needs to leverage its opportunities for success, put our young people back to work. Let's grow the economy. Let's restore hope and prosperity for Canadians. And to do that, this government has to show leadership. It has to get serious about the environment. It has to get serious about youth unemployment. It has to not cut veterans' benefit. And most of all, it has to work with the provinces, not blindside them by trying to upload a training program that they just devolve to them.
Hope and prosperity and training and leadership, all very good notes to end on.
All concepts that our government is committed to, Terry.
Thank you, Mark Adler, Peggy Nash, and Scott Bryson. Appreciate you all coming in. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks.